I also realized that, granting the panther was equipped with an almost human power of deduction, it would not appear in Gummalapur again for a long time after the fright I had given it the night before in following it with my torchlight. It was therefore obvious that I would have to change my scene of operations, and so, after considerable thought, I decided to move on to the village of Devarabeta, diagonally across an intervening range of forest hills, and some 18 miles away, where the panther had already sedoged 5 victims, though it had not been visited for a month. Therefore, I set out before 9 a.m. that very day, after an early lunch. The going was difficult, as the path led across 2 hills. Along the valley that lay between them ran a small jungle stream, and beside it I noted the fresh pugs of a big male tiger that had followed the watercourse for some 200 yards before crossing to the other side. It had evidently passed early that morning, as was apparent from the minute trickles of moisture that had seeped into the pug marks through the river sand, but had not had time to evaporate in the morning sun. Holding steadfastly to the job in hand, however, I did not follow the tiger and arrived at Devarabeta just after 5 p.m. The inhabitants were preparing to shut themselves into their huts when I appeared, and scarcely had the time nor inclination to talk to me. However, I gathered that they agreed that a visit from the man-eater was likely any day, for a full month had elapsed since his last visit and he had never been known to stay away for so long. Time being short, I hastily looked around for the hut with the highest wall, before which I seated myself as on my first night at Gummalapur, having hastily arranged some dried thorny bushes across its roof as protection against attack from my rear and above. These thorns had been brought from the hedge of a field bordering the village itself, and I had to escort the men who carried them with my rifle, so afraid they were of the man-eater's early appearance. Devarabeta was a far smaller village than Gummalapur, and situated much closer to the forest, a fact which I welcomed for the reason that I would be able to obtain information as to the movements of carnivora by the warning notes that the beasts and birds of the jungle would utter, provided I was within hearing. The night fell with surprising rapidity, though this time a thin sickle of new moon was showing in the sky. The occasional call of a roosting jungle cock, and the plaintive call of peafowl, answering one another from the nearby forest, told me that all was still well. And then it was night, the faint starlight rendering hardly visible, and as if in a dream, the tortuously winding and filthy lane that formed the main street of Devarabeta. At 8:30 p.m. a somber hind bellowed from the forest, following her original sharp note with a series of warning cries in steady succession. Undoubtedly a beast of prey was afoot and had been seen by the watchful deer, who was telling the other jungle folk to look out for their lives. Was it the panther or one of the larger carnivora? Time alone would tell, but at least I had been warned. The hind ceased her belling, and some 15 minutes later, from the direction in which she had first sounded her alarm, I heard the low moan of a tiger, to be repeated twice in succession, before all became silent again. It was not a mating call that I had heard, but the call of the king of the jungle in his normal search for food, reminding the inhabitants of the forest that their master was on the move in search of prey, and that one of them must die that night to appease his voracious appetite. Time passed, and then down the lane I caught sight of some movement. Raising my cocked rifle, I covered the object, which slowly approached me, walking in the middle of the street. Was this the panther after all, and would it walk thus openly, and in the middle of the lane, without any attempt at concealment? It was now about 30 yards away and still it came on boldly, without any attempt to take cover or to creep along the edges of objects in the usual manner of a leopard when stalking its prey. Moreover, it seemed a frail and slender animal, as I could see it fairly clearly now. 20 yards and I pressed the button of my torch, which this night I had clamped to my rifle. As the powerful beam threw across the intervening space it lighted a village dog, starving and lonely. It had sought out human company. It stared blankly into the bright beam of light, feebly wagging a skinny tail in unmistakable signs of friendliness. Welcoming a companion, if only a lonely dog, I switched off the light and called it to my side by a series of flicks of thumb and finger. It approached cringingly, still wagging its ridiculous tail. I fed it with some biscuits and a sandwich, and in the dull light of the starlit sky its eyes looked back at me in dumb gratitude for the little food I had given it, perhaps the first to enter its stomach for the past 2 days. Then it curled up at my feet and fell asleep. Time passed and midnight came. A great horned owl hooted dismally from the edge of the forest, its prolonged mysterious cry of hoo-hoo seeming to sound a death knell, or a precursor to that haunting part of the night when the souls of those not at rest return to the scenes of their earthly activities, to live over and over again the deeds that bind them to the earth. 1 o'clock, 2 and then 3 o'clock passed in dragging monotony, while I strained my tired and aching eyes and ears for movement or sound. Fortunately it had remained a cloudless night and visibility was comparatively good by the radiance of the myriad stars that spangled the heavens in glorious array, a sight that cannot be seen in any of our dusty towns or cities. And then, abruptly, the alarmed cry of a plover, or "Did you do it, bird," as it is known in India, sounded from the nearby muddy tank on the immediate outskirts of the village. "Did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it?" it called in rapid regularity. No doubt the bird was excited and had been disturbed, or it had seen something. The dog at my feet stirred, raised its head, then sank down again, as if without a care in the world. The minutes passed, and then suddenly the dog became fully awake. Its ears, that had been drooping in dejection, were standing on end, it trembled violently against my legs, while a low prolonged growl came from its throat. I noticed that it was looking down the lane that led into the village from the vicinity of the tank. I stared intently in that direction. For a long time I could see nothing, and then it seemed that a shadow moved at a corner of a building some distance away and on the same side of the lane. I focused my eyes on this spot, and after a few seconds again noticed a furtive movement, but this time a little closer. Placing my left thumb on the switch which would actuate the torch, I waited in breathless silence. A few minutes passed, 5 or 10 at the most, and then I saw an elongated body spring swiftly and noiselessly onto the roof of a hut some 20 yards away. As it happened, all the huts adjoined each other at this spot, and I guessed the panther had decided to walk along the roofs of these adjoining huts and spring upon me from the rear, rather than continue stalking me in full view. I got to my feet quickly and placed my back against the wall. In this position the eave of the roof above my head passed over me and onto the road where I had been sitting, for about 18 inches. The rifle I kept ready, finger on trigger, with my left thumb on the torch switch, pressed to my side and pointing upwards. A few seconds later I heard a faint rustling as the leopard endeavored to negotiate the thorns which I had taken the precaution of placing on the roof. He evidently failed in this, for there was silence again. Now I had no means of knowing where he was. The next 15 minutes passed in terrible anxiety, with me glancing in all directions in the attempt to locate the leopard before he sprang, while thanking Providence that the night remained clear. And then the dog, that had been restless and whining at my feet, shot out into the middle of the street, faced the corner of the hut against which I was sheltering and began to bark lustily. This warning saved my life, for within 5 seconds the panther charged around the corner and sprang at me. I had just time to press the torch switch and fire from my hip, full into the blazing eyes that showed above the wide-opened, snarling mouth. The .405 bullet struck squarely, but the impetus of the charge carried the animal onto me. I jumped nimbly to one side, and as the panther crashed against the wall of the hut, emptied 2 more rounds from the magazine into the evil, spotted body. It collapsed and was still, except for the spasmodic jerking of the still open jaws and long, extended tail. And then my friend the dog, staunch in faithfulness to his newfound master, rushed in and fixed his feeble teeth in the throat of the dead monster. And so passed the spotted devil of Gummalapur, a panther of whose malignant craftiness I had never heard the like before and hope never to have to meet again. When skinning the animal next morning, I found that the injury to the right paw had not been caused, as I had surmised, by a previous bullet wound, but by 2 porcupine quills that had penetrated between the toes within an inch of each other and then broken off short. This must have happened quite a while before, as a gristly formation between the bones inside the foot had covered the quills. No doubt it had hurt the animal to place his paw on the ground in the normal way, and he had acquired the habit of walking on its edge. I took the dog home, washed and fed it, and named it Nipper.